The final message from the stellar consortium still echoed in Tezra's mind as his vessel completed its docking sequence. The Nidarian contribution to our coalition remains inadequate. Diplomatic phrasing for what everyone understood. His species was considered too fragile to warrant protection. One by one, their supposed allies had withdrawn support, citing resource constraints or strategic realignments, all except Terrans, who had not only maintained their alliance, but increased their commitment to defending Nidarian territories. This was precisely why Tezra found himself anxiously preparing to disembark onto Terran Outpost Epsilon, his environmental suit's moisture regulators working frantically to manage his anxiety. His naturally moist, glistening skin pressed uncomfortably against the suit's inner lining, an unavoidable accommodation since Terran environments were far too arid for Nidarian physiology. As the airlock cycled, Tezra's sensory fronds twitched within their protective sheaths, detecting minute vibrations through the station's bulkheads. The movements felt different from Nidarian stations, harsher, more mechanical than the gentle rhythms he was accustomed to. Everything about Terran engineering felt resolute and utilitarian, from the practical gray passageways to the efficient lighting strips that lined them. The inner door opened with a pressurized hiss, revealing a reception chamber that somehow managed to be both intimidating and welcoming. The Terrans had attempted to soften their natural preference for functionality with strategically placed vegetation and warm-colored wall sections, though the military-grade reinforcement remained visible beneath these aesthetic touches. 2 Terrans awaited him, Commander Valen and Envoy Sarai, according to his briefing. Tezra couldn't help but marvel at their rigid stance, the way they balanced precariously on just 2 limbs. Their bodies seemed to move in segments, all hard angles and sharp movements, so unlike his own fluid locomotion. The commander wore the crisp uniform of the Terran Defense Corps, her dark hair pulled back severely, while Envoy Sarai's attire was softer though still distinctly formal by Terran standards. "Welcome to Outpost Epsilon." Sarai stepped forward with what Tezra recognized as a Terran smile, though it still triggered instinctive wariness in his nervous system. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Her tone was conversational, almost friendly, contrasting with the serious circumstances of their meeting. Tezra moved forward with dignity, his suit's movement assistants helping him maintain what Terrans would consider a professional bearing. "Envoy Sarai, Commander Valen," he acknowledged, his translator converting his chemical-based speech into comprehensible Terran language. "I appreciate your station's accommodation of my species' requirements." He attempted to project the formal gravity appropriate for such a crucial diplomatic mission, even as Commander Valen shifted her weight in what seemed like impatience. The environmental adaptations were no trouble. Valen spoke directly, though her expression remained receptive. "We've been upgrading our xenobiological support systems across all major outposts," she added with what Tezra was learning to recognize as dry humor. "Your requirements were simpler than the aquatic Meridian delegation we hosted last season." Tezra's sensory fronds twitched again, betraying his surprise at her casual mention of such technical adaptations. On his homeworld, such discussions would have involved multiple committees and formal acknowledgments of effort. "If you'll follow us." Sarai gestured toward a corridor branching from the reception area. "We've prepared the primary briefing room unless you'd prefer to rest first." The question was posed with genuine consideration, not with the usual condescension other species use when addressing Nidarian physiology and perceived lack of stamina. "I would prefer to proceed," Tezra responded, perhaps too stiffly, but he couldn't help it. The importance of his mission weighed upon him. Somewhere in this station, in these conversations with Terran representatives, lay the answer to the question that had brought him across 3 sectors of space. Why had Terrans alone chosen to stand with the Nidarians, while all others deemed them unworthy of protection? As they moved through the corridor, Tezra noticed how Valen and Sarai consciously adjusted their pace to match his slower progress. The commander's movements were precise and rigid, while the envoy's gait was more fluid, yet both displayed an ease with their surroundings that Tezra envied. They passed several crew members who barely gave the unusual trio a second glance: a military commander, a Terran diplomat, and a mollusk-like alien in an environmental suit apparently being common enough on this station. The briefing room revealed itself as another study in Terran contradictions. Robust communication equipment lined the walls, and reinforced furniture spoke of military utility. Yet the lighting had been thoughtfully adjusted to a spectrum that eased the strain on his light-sensitive optical receptors. Most surprisingly, among the various xenomorphic accommodations stood a support cradle perfectly adapted for Nidarian body structure. As Tezra settled into the cradle, his sensory fronts detected increasing activity through the station's walls. The subtle vibrations of personnel moving with heavy steps, the distant sounds of what he assumed were training exercises. After moments of diplomatic small talk, Commander Valen noticed his sensory appendages twitching and smiled that peculiar Terran smile. "I hope you won't mind if we combine our security briefing with a tour of some key facilities," she said, already reaching for a datapad. "There's something specific I'd like to show you in our training simulation center." The envoy's eyebrows rose slightly at this deviation from protocol, but Tezra found himself intrigued. Every movement through this station, every interaction seemed to peel back another layer of the mystery he had come to solve. Perhaps understanding why Terrans alone stood with his species meant understanding how they prepared for that stand. "I would appreciate that very much, Commander," he replied, his translator rendering his chemical speech into Terran sounds, while his body prepared for another journey through these strange, angular corridors. The path forward bustled with activity as they left the briefing room behind. Tezra's environmental suit glided smoothly across the deck plates, its locomotion assists adjusting to match the Terran's pace. Latest intelligence suggests Krell movement in Vostok sector. A voice carried from a passing group of officers, their faces drawn in concentration over shared data screens. "Third incident this cycle they've tested our boundary." Sarai caught Tezra's reaction, a slight wavering in his forward motion that betrayed his species' instinctive fear response. "The Krell compact has grown increasingly aggressive," the envoy acknowledged, her casual tone belied by the tension in her shoulders. "Not just toward Nidarian space, but toward ours as well. They're testing our response protocols, pushing boundaries, gathering intelligence. Classic preparation tactics," Valen added, her steps never faltering as she led them through a series of security checkpoints, each barrier recognizing her credentials instantly and sliding open, with barely a pause in their progress. A sudden burst of noise drew their attention to a side chamber where a group of pilots stood surrounded by circular displays, their hands moving through combat sequences with remarkable precision, their voices sharp with focus. Tezra found himself slowing, fascinated by the complexity of their movements. Unlike the Nidarian defense forces, which relied heavily on automated systems, these Terrans seemed to be integrating themselves directly into their combat protocols, their bodies moving in concert with their technology, neither fully organic nor purely mechanical. "Impressive, isn't it?" Valen had stopped with him, her expression softening with what might have been pride. "We discovered that Terran intuition, properly trained and augmented, still outperforms fully automated systems in complex combat scenarios. The Krell learned that the hard way in the Altari skirmish." Altari. Tezra's translator hesitated momentarily on his surprise. "That was your operation. We heard the Krell advance was halted there, but the details were classified." "Let's just say," Sarai interjected smoothly, "that Terran's commitment to the Nidarian alliance isn't purely altruistic. The Krell threat to your people endangers the stability of this entire sector. We've chosen to establish our defensive line here." Through another series of corridors, they passed more training facilities, each offering glimpses of Terran military preparation. In one, pilots maneuvered through virtual asteroid fields while simulated Krell fighters attacked from multiple vectors. In another, tactical officers debated strategy around a three-dimensional map of contested space, their fingers tracing potential attack routes with what Tezra considered remarkable efficiency. "Your species has an interesting approach to warfare," Tezra observed, his sensory fronds twitching as they detected the electromagnetic signatures of the simulation equipment. Most galactic powers rely more heavily on technological superiority. Valen's steps faltered for just a moment. "Technology is only as good as the strategy behind it," she said, her voice carrying an edge of what Tezra had learned to recognize as bitter experience. The Krell also discovered that, at Alteri, they expected our automated defense systems, our predictable response patterns. Instead, Sarai interrupted with a warning glance at the commander, who was sharing too much. "They discovered that humanity's greatest military asset isn't our technology." He paused as they reached a set of heavy doors, significantly more substantial than the others they'd passed. "It's our integration of weaponry, instinct, and combat wisdom derived from thousands of years of military history." The doors parted to reveal the Advanced Combat Simulation Center, a vast chamber Tezra instantly noticed was radiating energy. The air itself seemed charged with electricity, and his skin tingled even through his environmental suit. Banks of equipment lined the walls, their displays showing various combat scenarios playing out in real time. But what captured Tezra's attention wasn't the technology. It was the Terrans themselves. Dozens moved through the space with remarkable precision, their actions synchronized yet somehow unpredictable. Each person seemed to be simultaneously following a careful protocol, while ready to deviate from it at any moment. "Tell me, Ambassador," Valen said, her hand approaching a control panel, "how familiar are you with Terran theories of asymmetric warfare? Because what you're about to witness is a first-hand demonstration." Tezra felt his skin ripple with anticipation beneath his environmental suit. Perhaps here, in this chamber of carefully controlled chaos, he would begin to understand why Terrans had chosen such an unlikely species as an ally. As his mind pondered that question, the simulation chamber revealed itself to be nothing like what Tezra had expected. Where other species favored gleaming holograms and ethereal displays, the Terrans had built something remarkably physical. Solid metal and composite materials dominated the space. Banks of traditional screens lined the walls, their buttons and controls designed for direct manipulation rather than gesture interfaces. "You seem surprised," Valen noted, watching his sensory fronds wave in apparent confusion. She crossed to a locked cabinet and pressed her palm against a biometric scanner. "Most visitors expect something more advanced." Tezra's translator rendered the word with just a hint of his cultural assumptions. Sarai chuckled. "We find tangible interfaces more reliable in combat situations. Even training holograms are aesthetically pleasing, but try using one when your vessel's been hit by an electromagnetic pulse." The cabinet opened with a solid click, revealing rows of what Tezra recognized as projectile weapons, ancient technology by galactic standards, yet meticulously maintained. Valen lifted one of the rifles, checking it with practiced movements before holding it out to Tezra. "Would you like to examine it?" Tezra hesitated. His environmental suit's manipulators were certainly capable, but handling weapons contradicted every diplomatic protocol he knew. Still, something in Valen's expression suggested this was an important cultural exchange, so he accepted it. The weight surprised him. Even through the suit's feedback systems, he could feel the solid mass of it, the careful balance. This was not the elegant energy weapon favored by the Stellar Consortium. This was something older, more primitive, and yet. "You maintain these manually?" he asked, noticing the wear patterns that spoke of regular Terran contact. "Every soldier maintains their own equipment," Valen confirmed. She moved closer, adjusting Tezra's grip slightly. "These rifles have been in service for generations. We upgrade the internal components, but the basic design remains unaltered. Reliable, repairable, survivable." But why? The question escaped before Tezra could contain it. "Your species has access to more advanced technology. The Consortium's reports suggest you're capable of producing energy weapons that would. That would make us more like them." Saray's voice carried no judgment, only curiosity. Tezra's skin rippled with embarrassment beneath his suit. "I meant no offense. I simply don't understand." First, you maintain an alliance that others consider inefficient. Then I find you using technology that seems primitive. Valen supplied, but she was smiling. She took the rifle back, her movements displaying an intimacy with the weapon that spoke of years of practice. Let me show you something. Valen led them to a workbench where a rifle lay partially disassembled. Tools were arranged neatly beside it, each bearing signs of regular use. When I was a cadet, my instructor told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Technology doesn't win conflicts. People win conflicts, and people need tools they can trust, maintain, and repair in the field." Tezra watched as she picked up a tool, demonstrating how easily a soldier could break down and reassemble the weapon. But surely automated systems err. Wonderful until they fail, Sarai interjected. He'd been watching the demonstration with his arms crossed. Terrans learned some hard lessons in our early space conflicts. The more complex the system, the more catastrophic the failure. We're not technophobes, Valen continued, her hands never stopping their maintenance routine. Our vessels have AI assistants, advanced targeting systems, all the modern conveniences. But when everything fails, she patted the assembled rifle, we make sure our people can still fight. Something in her tone made Tezra's sensory fronds twitch. You speak from experience. A shadow passed across Valen's face. Alteri wasn't one with advanced technology. It was won by soldiers who kept fighting after their primary systems were disabled, who remembered their training when the AIs went dark after an energy core failure. She looked directly at Tezra. They understood that survival sometimes means embracing apparent weakness as strength. The implications hung in the air between them. Tezra felt his preconceptions shifting, not shattering, but realigning. He looked around the chamber again, seeing it with new perspective. What he had initially dismissed as primitive, he now viewed with a hint of appreciation for this preparation for worst-case scenarios. Eventually, Tezra spoke again, remembering something important. You still haven't answered my question, he said finally. Why maintain the alliance with my species when others see no strategic value in it? Valen and Sarai exchanged a glance that contained traces of unspoken communication. It was Sarai who finally answered, her diplomatic polish giving way to something more genuine. Perhaps, she said, you should consider that we don't measure strategic value the same way the consortium does. Before Valen could elaborate on that cryptic statement, the chamber's lighting shifted to a deep crimson. The change was so sudden that Tezra's sensory fronds retracted defensively into their protective casings. An alarm, not the measured tones of a drill, but the harsh wail of genuine emergency, cried through the air. The transformation in both Terrans was instant and complete. Gone was Sarai's diplomatic poise, replaced by focused alertness. Valen's casual demeanor vanished as she slapped the weapons cabinet shut with one hand while reaching for her communicator with the other. Station command. This is Valen. Status. Her voice carried none of the easy familiarity from moments before. The response came through garbled static that cut through words. Multiple contacts. Shields failing. Krell's signatures confirmed. We are under attack. The deck beneath them shuddered violently. Tezra's environmental suit compensated automatically, but he felt his body mass shift unpleasantly within it. Through his sensory fronds, he could detect unfamiliar energy patterns rippling through the station walls. Kinetic weapons fire. They're actually attacking the Terran station. The words escaped him in a burst of chemical signals that his translator struggled to keep pace with. The Krell wouldn't dare. Another impact cut him off. This time the lights flickered, and several of the training room screens went dark. Emergency backup systems activated, their vibrations adding to the cacophony of sensations overwhelming Tezra's sensitive fronds. Command center, Valen said, already moving toward the exit. Now, it wasn't clear if she was speaking to Sarai or Tezra or both, but the envoy was already in motion, her diplomatic stride replaced by surprising speed. Tezra found himself caught in their rush, his suit's locomotion assist straining to keep pace. The corridors that had seemed so orderly before had transformed into chaos. Emergency lights painted everything in shifting shadows as crew members rushed past them, each moving toward their assigned stations. Despite the obvious tension in their movements, there was no panic. Port shield grid is down, the announcement cut through local communications. Engineering teams to sections 7 through 12, rerouting power from non-essential systems. They rounded a corner to find a sealed pressure door blocking their path. Valen slammed her palm against the emergency override, but nothing happened. "Systems are degrading," she muttered, pulling an access panel open. "Sarai, give me a hand with this." The envoy moved without hesitation, helping her with the manual release mechanism. The sight of a diplomat performing emergency procedures with such familiarity added another layer of confusion to Tezra's already overwhelmed senses. The door finally groaned open, revealing a corridor filled with thin smoke. Environmental systems whined as they fought to clear the air. Through the haze, Tezra could see crew members helping injured colleagues, their movements urgent but coordinated. How did they penetrate the early warning systems? Sarai's question came between breaths as they continued their rush toward the command center. "They shouldn't have been able to." Valen replied when another impact rocked the station. This one closer. A panel exploded somewhere ahead of them, showering the corridor with sparks. Tezra's suit registered a brief temperature spike, automatically adjusting its cooling systems. Through the transparent sections of his environmental suit, his skin had taken on the mottled coloration that his species displayed under extreme stress. The Terrans either didn't notice or chose not to comment as they helped him navigate around a section of fallen ceiling panels. They passed a viewport, and for a moment, Tezra caught a glimpse of space beyond the station. The sight made his locomotion assist stumble. Multiple Krell vessels hung against the stars, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable. Energy weapons lanced between them and the station's remaining defensive systems. "This isn't a raid," Tezra heard himself say, his translator rendering his shock into flat Terran speech. "This is a full assault force." Questions later, Valen cut him off, pulling him away from the viewport as another blast illuminated space. "Command center's 2 sections ahead. Sarai, your diplomatic codes should still work on the primary access." The envoy was already moving to the security panel beside a set of heavy doors, her fingers flying across the interface. "Assuming systems are still," she cut off as the door slid open with agonizing slowness, revealing the organized chaos of the station's combat control center beyond. Tactical displays covered the walls, many showing damage reports or tracking incoming threats. Officers constantly moved between stations, calling out status updates and damage assessments. Through it all, Tezra could sense the underlying vibrations of the station's overtaxed systems. Power fluctuations, shield harmonics, weapons charging cycles, all combining into a display of combat that his species had evolved to fear. As they stepped into the command center, Valen was already shifting into her combat role, calling for status reports and issuing orders. Sarai moved toward the communication station, presumably to contact whatever authorities needed to be notified of this breach of galactic law. And Tezra found himself frozen, his sensory fronds withdrawn tight against his body, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. The Krell Compact hadn't just breached the peace, they had launched a direct assault on a distant Terran military installation. The implications were staggering, the potential consequences. "Ambassador." Valen's voice cut through his spiral of thoughts. She had paused in her duties just long enough to address him, her expression grave but controlled. "I suggest you pay very close attention to what happens next. You're about to see exactly why Terrans chose to stand with your people." The command center erupted with coordinated but urgent response as Valen strode to the central tactical station. Tezra's environmental suit remained locked in place, his body's chemical signals screaming for retreat, while he watched the Terrans move with impressive precision through their combat protocols. 3 assault squadrons, heavy cruisers leading each formation, Valen announced as she stared at a glowing crimson screen. They're using our own sensor data from the Alteri engagement. That's how they approached undetected. Clever. There was something almost like admiration in her voice, even as she began issuing rapid-fire orders. Point defense grid at partial capacity, a tactical officer reported. Main power rebooting, but we're receiving sufficient energy from the auxiliary systems. Tezra's sensory fronds trembled as he detected the massive energy transfers through the station systems. The Nidarian Defense Forces would have already begun evacuation procedures, their automated systems buying time for retreat. But the Terrans, they're spreading out, Sarai observed from beside him, the envoy's diplomatic polish giving way to tactical assessment. Classic encirclement pattern. No, Valen countered, her eyes narrowing at the display. Look at their velocity vectors. This isn't about surrounding us. They're positioning for something else. She straightened suddenly. They think we'll retreat, and they're setting up to intercept that escape route. Through his fear-induced paralysis, Tezra watched as the Terran smiled, a sharp predatory expression that made his skin ripple with instinctive unease. Helm, full power to maneuvering thrusters. Make it appear we're struggling to maintain position, Valen ordered. Weapons, I want all batteries charged but powered down. Make it look like that first hit caused more damage than it did. Plane wounded? Sarai asked, moving to a communication station with surprising familiarity for a diplomat. Plain predictable, Valen corrected. The Krell based their entire strategy at Alteri on our expected responses. They're doing the same thing here. She turned to address the command crew. All stations, battle protocol Omega. They anticipate a panicked retreat. Let's give them something else to consider. Tezra felt his translator struggle as he tried to process the rapid exchanges. His species' natural instinct for self-preservation made it difficult to comprehend the Terran's apparent eagerness to engage. Around him, crew members coordinated with an efficiency that spoke of endless drills and absolute trust in their commands. Enemy squadrons maintaining approach vectors, tactical reported. Reading power signatures consistent with weapon charging sequences. Hold position, Valen ordered, her voice carrying absolute authority. Let them believe we're struggling with systems damage. Wait for them to commit. Tezra's body twisted within his suit as another impact rattled the station, but the Terrans barely seemed to notice. Their hands remained steady on their controls, their voices calm as they reported status updates and damage assessments. He found himself remembering every diplomatic briefing, every strategic assessment that had dismissed his species as lacking the necessary aggression for effective military action. They're accelerating, Sarai reported, her diplomatic reserve completely abandoned in favor of military precision. All three squadrons closing to engagement range. Not yet, Valen murmured, watching the tactical display with predatory focus. Wait for it. Wait. Her hand slammed the command interface. Now. All batteries, full power. Helm. Emergency thrust port side. Target their center squadron before they can react. The station's response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy that had been carefully hidden surged through systems that only appeared damaged. Weapons that had seemed offline opened up with devastating accuracy on the unsuspecting Krell vessels. Through his sensory fronds, Tezra felt the massive power transfers that his species would have considered too risky, too aggressive to attempt. Direct hits on their lead cruiser, Tactical called out with professional satisfaction. Their formation is breaking apart. They expected us to flee, Valen said, her voice carrying the hint of satisfaction as she watched the Krell squadron scatter in confusion. Just like they expected the Nidarians to flee. But Terrans learned a long time ago that sometimes the best defense is to strike back decisively. The words hit Tezra with physical force. He understood now with brutal clarity why other species had abandoned his people to their fate. It wasn't just about physical capabilities or technological advancement. It was about this capacity for controlled aggression, this ability to transform fear into action. His body remained frozen in its fear response, chemical signals still screaming for retreat, while around him, Terrans coordinated their counterattack with remarkable precision. The difference between their species had never been more apparent, more devastating in its implications. The Krell fleet's retreat left an eerie quiet in the station's combat control center. Tezra's sensory fronts slowly extended from their protective casings, detecting the changed vibrations throughout the station. The frantic energy transfers of combat had been replaced by the steady hum of damage control systems and emergency protocols. Confirmed hits on 2 of their heavy cruisers. Tactical reported, their voiced hoarse from calling out combat updates. The 3rd Squadron's covering their withdrawal. They're falling back to the sector boundary. Valen nodded, but Tezra noticed she didn't share the crew's relief. Her eyes remained fixed on the damage reports scrolling across her display. Casualties. Medical reporting multiple injured from the initial impact, several critical. Sarai's diplomatic polish had completely fallen away. Section 7 took heavy damage. Emergency teams are having trouble accessing. Permission to assist. The words left Tezra before he could process them, his translator rendering them in clear, urgent tones. Both Terrans turned to look at him, and he realized he had moved from his frozen position for the first time since the battle began. Valen studied him for a moment, then nodded sharply. Sarai, take him to medical. They can use all the help available. She turned back to her tactical display. I need to coordinate with command about this breach of treaty space. The journey to medical took them through corridors that bore fresh battle scars. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, and the deck plates thrummed with the vibrations of overtaxed systems. But what struck Tezra most was the smell. His environmental suit's sensors detected traces of burned materials, smoke from ruptured power conduits, and beneath it all, the unmistakable scent of Terran blood. They found medical in controlled chaos. The main treatment area had overflowed into adjacent corridors, where makeshift triage stations handled the walking wounded. Through the transparent sections of his suit, Tezra's skin rippled at the sight of injured Terrans, their resilient bodies showing their vulnerability at last. A medic hurried past, arms full of medical supplies. Without thinking, Tezra extended his suit's manipulators to catch a roll of bandages that slipped from her grasp. She paused just long enough to nod thanks before rushing on. Over here. The call came from a doctor kneeling beside a wounded engineer. I need pressure on this wound while I prepare the regenerator. Tezra moved before Sarai could respond. His environmental suit's manipulators were steadier than Terran hands, designed for precise control rather than strength. He pressed the bandage exactly where indicated, his species' natural sensitivity to pressure allowing him to maintain perfectly consistent force. Good, the doctor said without looking up. Keep that steady. She worked quickly, her movements efficient but not rushed. You're the Nidarian ambassador. Yes, Tezra replied, his translator barely keeping pace with the rapid exchange. I have some xenobiological medical training. All our diplomats do. He didn't add that it was mostly theoretical in his case. Excellent. We need all the steady hands we can get. She finished with the regenerator and moved to check the bandage. Perfect pressure control. Can you help with other compression wounds? For the next hour, Tezra moved from patient to patient. His suit's manipulators proved ideal for maintaining precise pressure, freeing Terran hands for more complex procedures. He found himself working in seamless coordination with the medical team, his fear response completely forgotten in the focus of helping others, something that contradicted his instincts. You're skilled at this, Sarai observed during a brief lull. The envoy had been helping too, her diplomatic skills turned to comforting the injured and coordinating supplies. Tezra's skin shifted colors in what was his species' equivalent of embarrassment. The pressure sensitivity. It's just our physiological nature, nothing exceptional. Precisely, Sarai said with what seemed like particular emphasis. It's how you're made, just like our ability to fight is how we're made. She gestured around the medical bay. Look at this. We won the battle, yes, but we're not invincible. We need more than just warriors. The implications of those words hit Tezra with surprising force. He watched the medical team work, Terrans using their strength and decisiveness to save lives rather than take them. He remembered how his own supposedly weak traits had proven unexpectedly valuable in the aftermath. "Your species chose to stand with us," he said slowly, his chemical signals forming the words with new understanding. "Not because we failed to see your weaknesses," Sarai finished, "but because you recognized our strengths." "Different species, different capabilities," Sarai continued. "The Krell and their allies see that as justification for dominance. We see it as opportunity for collaboration." She paused as Valen entered the medical bay, her command duties temporarily satisfied. The commander surveyed the scene, noting Tezra's position among the medical team with apparent approval. "Status: all critical cases stabilized," the doctor reported, "thanks in part to our ambassador here. Those manipulators are better than any surgical assistant for maintaining steady pressure." Valen nodded, unsurprised. "Good work, Ambassador." She looked around the medical bay at Terrans and a single Nidarian working together to heal the battle's wounds, still wondering why we maintained the alliance. Tezra's sensory fronds waved in a negative gesture. For the first time since arriving on the station, he felt he truly understood not just why Terrans had stood with his species, but why that choice made them stronger, even if just by a little. Hours later, as the station's systems slowly returned to somewhat normal operation, Tezra found himself back in the briefing room where his journey had begun. The space felt different now, not just a room designed with careful consideration for alien physiology, but a symbol of something deeper. "The Stellar Consortium sees strength only in terms of military might," Sarai said, her diplomatic polish returned but now underlaid with proven substance. "They abandoned your species because they saw you as merely a burden. But Terrans did not. You saw something they missed," Tezra replied, his translator rendering the words with newfound confidence. Through his environmental suit, his skin displayed patterns of understanding rather than fear. Sarai smiled and nodded in agreement. Tezra understood at last. His mission to discover why Terrans stood with his species had revealed something far more profound. A future where different beings could complement each other's capabilities rather than compete to prove their worth. His skin rippled with the colors of certainty as he prepared to share this revelation with the rest of his species, who remained wary of Terrans. Sarai extended her hand for a handshake, and Tezra mirrored the gesture. As understanding dawned upon him at last, he realized the truth. The Nidarians were not a species in need of protection. They were invaluable partners bringing unique strengths to an alliance with Terrans. In that truth lay a power far greater than the Krell Compact or the Consortium could ever comprehend.